Hey everyone, Volty here, back with another video. Now today's video is going to be a little bit different. This is not going to be directed towards the standard 7-Point Highlander community. This is actually going to be for your friends and family who don't play the format, who you're trying to get into the format. So lots of sharing is going to be appreciated for this, but basically we're going to give a rundown over 7-Point Highlander, what the format is, what it entails, and some tips and tricks on getting into the format for new players. So let's get right into it. So what is 7-Point Highlander? What are the rules? It's a constructed format, 60 minimum main, 15 sides. So unlike Canadian Highlander, which is 100 cards, this is a 60-15 format. Construction is basically going to be like Modern or Legacy. Now obviously you can play more than 60 cards in your main deck if you would like, for the purposes of Yorion or just because you're feeling spicy, but those are the minimum requirements. Now Singleton. So 7-Point Highlander, unlike Vintage or Legacy or Modern, you can only have one copy of any card in your deck, both in the main and side, and that is of course excluding basics and snow basic lands. It's an eternal format, so it's not rotating. We don't have a rotation cycle like standard. And all of the supplementary products that Wizards makes become legal in Highlander, much in the same way that they do for Legacy and Vintage. So whenever a new set comes out like Bloomburrow, and we have a Commander product as well, the Commander product is also legal in 7-Point. Competitive, so it is primarily designed to be a 1 versus 1 tournament format. There are plenty of singleton formats like Commander and CDH that are designed to be multiplayer, but Highlander is not one of them. You are expected to be building a deck with the purpose of defeating one opponent at a time. And we have a custom ban list or a points list. So the cards that are banned in Vintage for various reasons like Conspiracy, Shahrazad, Chaos Orb, all of them are still banned. So Conspiracies and anti-cards that remove themselves from your deck, they're still banned. You're expected to have 60 at the start of the game. And we have a point buy system that is applied to the most powerful cards. So if we didn't have a point buy system, the format would essentially be Vintage. You would have one Black Lotus and one of each Moxen in your deck, because obviously that would improve your win rate. Now the point system. So the most powerful cards across Magic have point values attached to them, and the committee, the Australian Highlander Committee, decides what points are applied to what cards. They range from 1 to 5, and you can play 7 points worth of cards across your deck list. 7-Point is obviously where the name 7-Point Highlander comes from. There's an additional point available to players who don't play any cards on the reserve list, so things like Dual Lands, Gaia's Cradle, for example. If you forego any and all of those cards, you can play 8 points worth of cards across your deck list. There's going to be a video coming out specifically talking about the Highlander accessibility rule, which is what this rule is, but for the most part people will be playing 7 points. And cards enter and leave the points list as needed, so the more a card gets played, the more powerful it is, the more it wins, the more likely it is to receive a point or an additional point. If a card on the points list hasn't been used in a long time, then there's the likelihood that it might lose a point, either down to 0 or to a lower bracket. So this is the points list that you can see on screen. There'll be links below so you can check out the points list as it is if you're watching this video in the future. But as you can see, the most powerful cards in Magic, Ancestral Recall, Time Walk, Mana Crypt, these are worth 5 points. So you're only going to be able to have a maximum of 3 cards that are worth points in your deck if you play 5, or if you play a 5-pointer. And then we have other big offenders like Black Lotus, Time Vault, Thassa's Oracle, those are at 4. And then we have powerful cards that improve your win rate, like Deathrite Shaman and Ancient Tomb. Those are all at 1, for example, and typically a deck will include, maybe a 2-point, maybe a couple of 2-point cards, maybe a 3 and some 1s, or if it's a dedicated Time Walk deck, for example, it'll have a 5 and 2 1s, and that's typically how the construction goes. The points list gets updated periodically. It's usually every couple of months. So if you have the 7 Point Highlander website bookmarked, you can keep an eye on it and make sure your deck is legal before any events you play. So pros and cons, what's good about 7 Point Highlander? Let's get into it. So first and foremost, it's a singleton format. This is going to lead to higher variance naturally, and there's lots of different gameplay patterns that can occur, so replayability is pretty high as well. You can very easily spar with a training partner for a couple of hours, play several dozen matches, and all of them will look somewhat different. Of course, there's plenty of ways to increase the consistency in your deck. You can play cantrips like Brainstorm and Ponder. You can play tutors like Green Sun Zenith, for example. So some of the more common play patterns will occur more frequently than in a 100-card commander format, but for the most part there is still quite a high level of variance, which is usually fun. The points list is continually being adjusted. This prevents stagnation in the format. So one of the common issues with formats like Modern is that cards will enter the ban list and never leave it. And on the one hand, that's good. We don't want things breaking formats over and over again every couple of years. On the other hand, in a format designed to be as powerful as Highlander is, we want people to be able to do the cool things. And so cards that are at a higher point level but not seeing any play may get those points reduced in order to shake up the format. The point buy system itself is perfect, in my opinion. So you can design your deck in any way you want. If you want to play Treasure Cruise and a bunch of powerful 1-point blue cards, you can do that. If you want to spend all of your points on Ancestral Recall instead of Treasure Cruise to make sure that you can draw your 3 whenever you can, rather than losing to Graveyard Hate, then you can do that too. Every set is legal, so I mentioned this earlier. Basically every time new cards come out, there is a potential that they will make an impact on 7 Point Highlander. This is really cool, in my opinion. We get to see a lot of adjustments to the format every couple of months. Not every set is going to dramatically shake up things, but every set has the potential to introduce something new. The format is impossible to solve. So despite it being a competitive tournament format where people are playing to win, it is impossible to solve the format because of the point buy system and individual expression. We don't have the ability to play 4 of every card in a Modern or Legacy format, for example, so consistency being lower than average, variance being higher than average. It's impossible to see 8 copies of the same deck in a Highlander top 8, which is quite good. It's a community-driven format. This is a really big deal. 7 Point Highlander is an Australian format, and every city in Australia plays it to some extent. There are, several hundred players, maybe several thousands of players who have decks ready to go, and there's lots of engagement with other players and brewers pretty constantly. As you can see, I'm making content about it, and there are articles on the website, and the Discord is exploding. Very, very popular format. Alright, what's bad about it? This is in the interest of disclosure and transparency. The buy-in for 7 Point is really expensive, especially if you're not a Legacy player or an Eternal player with a collection already, or a high-end Commander player with dual lands. So dual lands, high-end staples, those are the biggest issue, realistically. So things like Gaia's Cradle. If you want to play a control deck, you might need a Tabernacle for your sideboard. There's all kinds of weird cards that are just too expensive, and that is something to keep in mind. The format isn't officially supported by WotC. This is actually a pretty big deal. You can't play the format at all on Arena, and in order to play it on Moto, you need to be in the Freeform queue or the Vintage queue. so that you have access to every card being legal, and you'll typically be playing in a queue 1v1 against a person that you've pre-organized with, which is a bit difficult. It's something that we manage, but it is of note that you can't simply log onto your computer and decide to play Highlander against unknown opponents. There's a decent level of maintenance. This is actually a pretty big deal for Eternal players especially. On the one hand, yes, you can have a Highlander deck, have it in a box, and come back 6 months later, check the points list to determine if your deck is legal and fire it off. However, every now and then the format gets shaken up in a major way. There's going to be mechanics that you need to understand. There's going to be a lot of gameplay interactions that may have adjusted. Every change to Magic over time will impact Highlander in some way. The most recent example is the introduction of the initiative mechanic. Combat with the monarchy is pretty simple. Combat and the initiative is very different. Suddenly the initiative is triggering in weird points, and you're not exactly certain what's going on, and asking a judge to explain an entire mechanic at the start of a game is pretty bad. So there's a little bit of homework to do if you fall out of the format, but it's not too serious. The last con, there's pretty minimal education around the format. Information on the metagame and deck construction. It can be a little bit confusing. Plenty of articles on the website are outdated, for example, and it's not super easy to dive into the format unless you know what you're doing or where to look. There are a couple of content creators trying to make that easier, myself included, so fingers crossed that we can have an impact on that. But unlike, going to MTG Goldfish and finding the most recent modern and standard decks, you simply can't do that. So if you're interested in 7-Point Highlander and you want to start playing the format, how are you going to go about it? Playing it in person. So the 7-Point Highlander Discord, which I'll link below, it's very good for finding events, it's very good for finding LGSs and sourcing deck lists. If you're based in Australia, it's going to be pretty easy to play some Highlander every week. Maybe not every week, maybe every fortnight. Most of the major cities have some representation, and finding LGSs and events, or larger events, is quite easy. Going to CanCon, for example, in January, there's always a big Highlander event, and there's plenty of postings across the major cities. If you're not based in Australia, it is going to be more difficult, practically speaking. There is a channel specifically on the Discord for meetups for non-Australians who want to play the format, but if that isn't going to work, then you might have to stick to playing online on Modo. If you're an LGS and you're not based in Australia and you want to grow a community for the format, that's really good. We love hearing that. If you want to reach out on the Discord or to any of the Australian stores, you can get some advice on buy-in and holding events and ensuring legality, what level of judge staffing you need, and prize support, for example. Unlike most of the other formats, prize support in Highlander is usually on the higher end, just because the format is more expensive, so it's expected that people want to play at higher stakes. Obviously that doesn't have to be the case, but Highlander players in general aren't going to care about pricing as much if it's a booster box of a standard legal set. Playing the format online, so the Discord is the main way to connect with people. You can't play leagues on Modo. There aren't official venues or avenues to play the format, unfortunately. However, it's not that hard to find a game. We have a channel on the Discord specifically for people looking to battle, basically. Test out new decks, test out new ideas. As long as you can find someone and you have the deck ready to go on Modo, you can play it in the freeform lobby, you can play it in the vintage lobby, and you can make sure that you can get some games in to learn the format before you decide to commit to something. We also have plenty of 7-Point Highlander tournaments that are on a much larger scale. Every couple of months there's something pretty big happening. And we've also started to see that expansion into the Modo space. CBR MTG, big shout out, they're looking to hold Moto events far more regularly than they used to be held. I believe they're aiming for weekly, but fortnightly is probably more expected, and we're seeing a fair amount of growth in that space, so that's really good. Alright, a bit of a wrap up here. The format is great, in my opinion. The community is growing. We're seeing a lot of adjustments and changes to make sure that the format stays alive. The bigger events are happening more frequently. People are making more and more content, myself included. If you want to hit a sub so that you can find more out about the format, by all means go for it. There's going to be a lot of specific videos coming up from myself in order to get people into the format, so breakdowns of popular archetypes, deck techs of popular decks that people have been playing for a long time. So if you hit that sub, you'll be able to find out when those videos are coming. But otherwise, if you've got questions, the Discord is the place to go. You can also message me on Twitter, or you can reach out to any of your Australian friends that play Magic. They'll probably know about the format and be able to answer any questions that you might have. But otherwise, that's it from me today. If you like the video, feel free to give it a like. If you're excited to try the format and you want to learn more, feel free to comment and ask any questions that you have. But otherwise, Volty out. Have a good one.